I'm delighted to be here with you today. So, apparently, the intellectual Gore Vidal once told a joke on radio about the British Prime Minister Macmillan visiting the President of France, Charles de Gaulle. And at the state dinner, he asked Madame de Gaulle what she most looked forward to in her retirement. It took her no time. Madame de Gaulle said, "A penis." And poor man, he didn't know what to say. At first, he mumbled something like, I can see where you're coming from, and not so much time for that kind of thing nowadays. Until he realized that what Madame de Gaulle had said was just a French accent version of happiness. And so, you know, misunderstandings like this can happen, especially if English is not your first language. I speak for myself. As a boy growing up in Italy, I might have said apple and oni, or I'm having an haircut at the airport. You know, messing up those H's and placing them where they don't belong. But we can use the dialogue to talk about issues that matter to us: relationships, fulfillment, love, intimacy. Is fulfillment in love something that we only achieve when we think we're ready for it, or when we got married, we own a house, we have children, maybe even a dog? And as we pursue this distant happiness, can we make every step rich and enjoyable and learn how to love day after day? It seems that we live in interesting times for relationships. Loneliness is an epidemic. There are a lot of single people. If they live in the city, they probably look for relationships and they stumble upon sex. Dating apps give us an endless number of potential partners to choose from, and then we have shops where you can pay to get a cuddle. And recently, a study showed that the generation of millennials, the very young, let alone relationships, were having less sex than the previous generation. So it seems that we crave meaningful relationships, and yet they're difficult to find. Intimacy is something that we long for, we appreciate, and sometimes we may be afraid of. Today, I'm going to tell you a few stories. I'm going to introduce you to a few characters whose fears and aspirations usher them in, through, and out of intimacy. Anita is a woman in her 40s who just cannot find a boyfriend. She's tempted to make a t-shirt that says lonely and wear it at parties or on the street. She checks the gas stove 5 times before she goes out. And sometimes she has restless nights. She has a hard time sleeping. She hyperventilates. And during the day, Anita stares at couples, those in the park who stroke each other with a blade of grass, those who argue in the subway, and those who choose frugally off a list at the supermarket. And she asks herself, what do they have I don't? When she was younger, Anita didn't want anyone to tell her what to do, and now every decision in life on her own seems like a matter of life and death. She's tired of being her only reference. She needs someone to tell her that everything is going to be all right. And she dreams of a relationship made of sacrifice, a long life, a lifelong together that feels like the instant of the first kiss, someone who can predict what she's about to say, whose breath and heartbeat coincide with hers, especially during difficult moments. She also wonders, how much time would I gain if I were in a relationship? If this aspect of my life was sorted, would I be better at other aspects of my life? Also, am I going to get lonelier and lonelier? And can people read it on my face? Am I scaring people away? If her own concerns weren't enough, Anita gets a lot of pressure from her parents, who just don't understand why their golden daughter is still single. At Anita's age, Ruth, her mother, was indeed married with a house, children, and a dog. And she met her own husband through friends at a family dinner. And so at family gatherings, Anita gets this question that annoys her. how can someone like you be single? And of course, they ask it because they care for her. And it's kind of interesting that parents should ask this question. They're oblivious perhaps to what happens, how it is to find a partner today. But it's also interesting because some of the reasons why we may be single are actually rooted in childhood. It's not the whole picture, but the way we approach love and relationships today echoes experience with caregivers from our past. And this reminds me of a time when I used to work in a neuroscience laboratory, and part of my job was to observe mouse mothers that took care of their pups. I know it may sound strange to you, but you can tell if a mouse is taking care of their pups in an experiment. And so for hours a day, every day, weekends included, for a couple of months, in a smelly room and wearing a gear that made me look and sweat like the Michelin Man, and wearing goggles, infrared goggles, because we also did it in the dark, I was observing these mothers and taking note of their behavioral changes. And there were two main types of mother. One, we may call her a little distracted, who just didn't care a lot about the pups and the litter. She spent time off the nest, she drank and ate on her own. She also didn't touch them. So altogether, she was not very warm. The other type of mother never left the nest. If a pup left the nest, she would run after it and retrieve it. She also licked them and groomed them. And she hugged them, assuming what we called in the lab jargon, the blanket pose. And I had letter codes, so R was for retrieve, E was for eating, S for sleeping, etc. And I was taking note of those changes. Now, I know what you're thinking. What about dads? What about fathers? They don't picture in this particular experiment, but of course, we know that dads have an important role, especially for us, the humankind. And there's a lot of research now that is uncovering that. However, I've told you about this because what counts is what happens to the pups when they grow up. If you test them later in life, those who were raised by the neglectful mother, they were more fearful. And those raised by the other mother, the mother who licked them and groomed them, they were not fearful. Now, when you carry out these experiments, you inevitably make a connection between data and life, between measurements and experience. So I found myself in front of those cages asking myself this question: did my mother lick me? How much did she lick me? And what about the blanket pose? If you've ever been to a psychoanalyst, we know that childhood leaves a mark on our development. And, things are not clear-cut, and there are a lot of shadings, but if you grow up to caregivers who are warm and reliable, you tend to think that you're worthy of attention, that you can depend on others because your needs will be met. If caregivers are not always available or unreliable, you may be a little anxious in relationships and seek reassurance from your partners, fear abandonment and rejection, so clingy. If caregivers have been indifferent and consistently absent, you may grow up to mistrust others. So we may equate intimacy with disappointment. And we want it, but yet we're a little bit afraid of it. So with this in mind, let's talk about Scott and Liam. Scott and Liam have been together for a couple of years, and now Scott has been relocated abroad for work. So their relationship is at stake. They face an important choice. It's put to the test of commitment. Stay together or not. And they have a connection, but they're often caught in a chase of attraction and rejection. They always calculate what to give and how much to receive. It took Liam 1 year until he accepted to be referred to as together with Scott. Scott always books 2 tickets for a theater show and waits for Liam to go to the newest exhibition in town, and Liam just goes on his own. Liam sometimes ignores Scott's calls on purpose, and when he wants to hear from me, he pretends that he's misdialing so that he knows that Scott will immediately call him back upon seeing the missed call. He never accepts to live together, and he goes on holiday with Scott, but then he also says that once a year he has to go for a holiday by himself because he needs the solitude. So Scott is clingy and nervous. Liam defends his freedom. Scott craves facts, and Liam cannot stand promises. Scott wants guarantees. Liam keeps his options open. And intimate arrangements of this kind can last for a long time. Now, I'd like to talk to you about another character, Paul. Paul is a little bit like Anita. He's a kind man in his late 20s, and he thinks he's wasting the best years of his life. He's emerging from a 3-year-long relationship, and now he's single, and he doesn't know how to find a partner. His friends say to him, go online. So he goes online, has various experiences, shares them with his friend Rebecca, who's having exactly the same experiences. Fred, his friend, asks him, so what do you want? Do you want sex or a cuddle? And Paul says, well, if possible, I'd like to have both. And many of the guys that Paul interacted with were kind of a waste of time. They got to know each other, chatting, texting, and discovering their interests, etc. They had long conversations, and they made plans about what they would do if they were together, and where they would go if they met in person. But then after the virtual excitement, when it came to actually arranging a date, excuses not to meet, and they ghosted him. As if by actually meeting him, as if the meeting killed their desire, and to keep it alive, it was better to stay in the fantasy zone. Now, then there were the ones who only wanted sex. Once Paul got a message from a guy who wanted to meet him, and so Paul said, oh, let's go see the show, and then dinners and drinks. Reply, thank you for your kind invitation. I'm not sure where you're heading with this. As if by suggesting a full-fledged date, Paul was ignoring the possibility of sex or extending a marriage proposal. Next to those who only wanted sex and those who only fantasized about sex, there were those who seemed perfectly eligible for a long-term opportunity. They went on dates with Paul, maybe they even slept with him, but then despite their attraction, they withdrew and they said, oh, well, with you, it wouldn't be the same as it is with the other guys. You're unique, perfect, different. I'm not the one for you. Unique, perfect, different, special. These were all a cover for something else, real. Chats, ghosting, one-off dates work to keep everything in the realm of impossibility, to stay safe from the intensity of desire and the anxiety that is connected to it. Sadly, it's possible that for some of the guys, they rejected Paul because they were, for some psychological pressure from family or society, they were not at ease with their own homosexuality. And so they got stuck in the belief that they themselves were not worthy of love, and what they wished for was not worthy. So when the prospect of a relationship loomed, they ran away. The problem is that attitudes propagate. So this behavior generates reticence, cynicism, disbelief, a kind of forced resignation to the impossibility of love. They take a lot of the joy away. And what's the price? Loneliness. So it seems that we have many ways to stay safe from intimacy. Sometimes we do so without realizing it. And sometimes we do so because we found ourselves unacceptable. Something in life needs fixing. Wrong job, lack of vocation, unresolved past issues, or emotional scars, disappointment, hurt, loss, and scars so deep and painful and fear of exposure so powerful that we create our own prohibitions against intimate fulfillment. And so we stay stuck in choices and situations that keep dissonance between who we are and how we live, what we want and what we can offer, what we desire and what we ask for, to avoid getting in touch with our raw selves. So we don't even try to make things different. We don't break with habits. We stay in a rut and pretend that everything is fine. So let's talk about John. Unlike Paul and Anita, John doesn't have a problem finding people to go out with. His problem is that his relationships end shortly after they have started. He's able to establish an amazing connection, but then after an initial period when everything seems to be going fine, a shadow draws upon him. something stops him from giving himself completely, as if he wasn't allowed to, or if he didn't allow himself to. So he was not at peace with himself. He was unhappy at work. And he has also received so much disappointment that he's careful about how much he gives. And he questions whether he actually knows how to love. In some cases, John wants to stay, and he tries to forget or bury his worries. However, he kind of gives his lovers the responsibility of his development. And so when they sense it, that something is unresolved, they vanish as soon as they notice the first signs of weakness on his part. And more often than not, it's John who finds himself unacceptable, so he leaves them, he lets them go. And either way, instead of working on it together, they part. And sadly, in search of a new partner with the same hope, but the next partner turns out to be very similar to the previous one. So we keep making the same mistake again and again. It happens. Change is difficult in life, and is extremely difficult when it comes to love. We must recognize it and work very hard for it. So you see, for a long time we can remain deaf to what we really need and want, but then suddenly something says enough, and so we begin to make different choices that are more fulfilling for us. And as we do this, we also need to realize we don't need to be perfect to be included in someone else's life. We can fix some of the broken parts and accept what cannot be fixed. And when this happens, when we feel ready or the right person comes along, then we can look us in the mirror without looking away. Qualities and defects. When two people realize that they are inseparable, it's because they recognize and need the power of that mirror. Love and intimacy do not arise from fear or protection. Love is to submerge fear with courage, the courage to face ourselves in a way that doesn't erase us, but lets us embrace insecurities, accept them, and maybe overcome them. And to feel comfortable with ourselves and others so that we can be generous, so that no rejection can actually hurt us. So, relationships are difficult when we want to start them and when we are in them. What to do? One late evening, as I stood in front of the cages, I got a message from the mice. I was taking note of the behavioral changes, cage by cage, and noting down the letters. I don't know how, I composed the word respect. And this can be a general message for everyone in their relationships. Respect ourselves, be confident about who we are, realize what we can give, and once we know that, we offer it as the kindest and most humble gift. But also respect one another, because we are all on different paths. We all have different levels of emotional maturity. So it would be nice to show solidarity with ourselves and those we meet along the way, to be ready to give and receive help, to give and receive examples, and be ready for compromise if something inside us tells us that the person we've found is the best thing that has ever happened to us. And respect what we feel, respect for the feeling of love itself, which is smarter than we are, and learn to notice where it hides. So basically what I'm saying, perhaps, is let us give intimacy a chance, and let us not miss chances with small or big gestures. When someone smiles at us, we can be friendly, requite the smile, and be curious, and not show disinterest just because it's cool to do so, or go run and check if they're online rather than talking to them in person. Also, let's not miss an opportunity to express our feelings when it really matters, when the moment asks us to do so. And let's not walk away or let others walk away from something before we've actually figured out what it is. I suppose this is an idea that we may remember when sometimes the loving company of friends, family, and colleagues is not enough, and we are alone at night, eating while standing in the only company of our smartphone, without anyone to tell our day to. when we are in our darkest hour and we crave someone who knows us deeply and whom we can trust and we know won't have judgment. Or it's just a beautiful day, and we want to embrace this beauty and go climb a mountain early in the morning with someone special. So maybe opening up to others makes us vulnerable, but it's all worth the risk. We can be strong on our own, but togetherness makes us stronger. Thank you.